Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the Sacred Wisdom podcast. I am joined with my amazing brother Stephen Denman again today, and we are going to discuss the airships of Tartaria. Now, these airships are just blown my mind as I've looked into the photographs and the history of them. And my question is, was this technology kind of put aside and developed further and almost taken into a breakaway civilization? And I am joined with my incredible brother again today, Stephen Denman, to bring us all this knowledge and information on Tartaria and the amazing fascination of these airships. So welcome, Stephen.
Hello, Zach. I hope all's good with you.
Nice to see you, brother. Thank you for coming along. And first of all, let's discuss a little bit about the airships and where they began and what was the origin of these airships, because it would seem they go back to as far as like when the Vimanas and the old techs and these old technologies that were around. So tell us more.
I think if you go back to what history won't accept is the unofficial founding date of the development and the emergence of Great Tartaria on the 16th of February 458 BC, and then its actual further scientific development, really, which is the time when many of these rudimentary airships were actually starting to be commercially manufactured across Great Tartaria in northern Russia from the 4th of October 1586. So, during that time, we're talking about the medieval period. Now, in terms of what Western science is going to say, they're going to say that's absolute nonsense, that's ludicrous conspiracy theories. But we have to understand that the aerial-based and anti-gravity-based occult technology that was so prevalent in Great Tartaria and therefore across northern Russia had been literally something that had secretly been used in different ways all the way back to the time of the civilization of the Nordic Hyperboreans and the technologies they had based around the use of, shall we say, the shining pyramids or the crystal pyramids that were so prevalently constructed and were fully connected to various types of anti-gravity platforms, including obviously levitating huge blocks of stone into place to construct further shining pyramids and crystal pyramids. So when it came to the scientific development in the later stages of the civilization of Great Tartaria from the 4th of October 1586, what we can see is that a lot of this occult technology had become very much focused on anti-gravity, the use of aerial navigation, and the development of electrically powered airships. And there were so many different designs that the Nordic Tartarians, or these Tartarian Aryans, for want of a better phrase, had been manufacturing. And so this really is the inceptional historical period or timeline as to when the first of these rudimentary airships started to emerge. But obviously this is classed as an unofficial version of history. We know also that the different designs were something that were, shall we say, allowable and possible, simply because every one of the airships from Great Tartaria was literally doing the very same as the various buildings, such as the healing temples, various governmental buildings across the towns and cities of Great Tartaria, northern Russia. It was to draw down and to effectively use the telluric electricity from the atmosphere. The actual airships that we are aware of in terms of the conventional sense, we're told were initially filled with hydrogen, which is obviously highly flammable. And then obviously the commercial manufacturers in different countries like the United Kingdom of Great Britain, across France and Germany and Western Europe, and obviously in the United States of America, started to use helium, which is pretty much non-flammable. And so, but what they weren't doing was using the original form of aerial-based occult technology that was very commonplace and was normalized in the manufacturing of the airships from Great Tartaria, which was to have onboard electrical capacitors that were fully insulated, and the metal frameworks of their own airships actually were actually highly conductive, and they had metal sheeting that was predominantly non-conductive on the outsides of the actual airships in Great Tartaria. So they weren't, giant airships that were covered in various types of high tensile fabrics. They were actually using different metallic substances, both conductive and non-conductive, and their airships had some kind of antennae that was then used to draw down the telluric electricity to the onboard capacitors, and these would create an electrical or an electromagnetic resonant field that could then levitate the airships, and then obviously with engines obviously fully fitted at the rear of these airships, that also created propulsion.
Brilliant summary, Steve. Thank you for that. And back in the 1800s, where you had these kind of Eiffel Tower like structures that were around, and the airships would actually fill up at these. Is this where they would fill up hydrogen? Was that what they were, or was it something else going on there? Because it also, as well, the Eiffel Tower, although people say that was an aerial or some nature, or possibly, I think that it was something for the airships, that the airships actually used it, and it must have been huge airships that kind of went on there. What do you think about that with the aerials? What was going on there?
Well, for starters, I mean, obviously, yes, you had what was known as airship masts. So you can say the Eiffel Tower in Paris in north central France was both a telluric receiver of electricity from the atmosphere. There were huge ground capacitors which were dismantled in that area of Paris. We know that many of the airship masts served a dual purpose, one which was obviously to load and unload the passengers and cargo onto and off. Obviously, the airships, these were transatlantic airships, trans-Pacific airships. And obviously, if you look at the vast landmass of northern Russia, ranging interestingly from the same kind of locations where many of these Hyperborean pyramids that have also been called shining pyramids and crystal pyramids in the Kola Peninsula of them amongst a blast of northwestern Russia and across the Yamalo-Nenets autonomous Okrug of north central Russia.
So were these masts, were they found in northern Russia? Have these actually been located? Is there a similar type mast like they had the air? I haven't actually ever looked into that, but have you found that through your research?
Well, originally that was part of the occult technology, that you had these aerial masts or airship masts that were basically high altitude landing stations for literally, and a lot of them had elevators, so that you could actually take the passengers and cargo up and down, load and load and offload those passengers and cargo into and out of the actual airships. And so this was very commonplace in the towns and cities of Great Tartaria and across much of northern Russia. And even if you go into, as I've just mentioned, in north central Russia, across the polar Urals and the northern Urals, and then across to what's known as the Kamchatka Peninsula and the Russian Far East, and touching on parts of Siberia in northeastern Russia, these were again very commonplace because across the vast landmass of northern Russia, eastern Russia, southern Russia, and western Russia is so huge that the road networks were absolutely appalling. It wasn't feasible to then also transport large amounts of commercial items by using locomotive trains and carriages and so forth, and freight trains. It was much easier, more logical to use these huge airships. And of course, if they're drawing down telluric electricity into onboard capacitors, same as the many different buildings of the towns and cities of Great Tartaria, these Nordic Tartarians had a boundless amount of electrical energy they could use for anti-gravity, therefore levitation and propulsion purposes, to transport around very quickly huge amounts of building and construction materials. And this would explain why there were such vast buildings and that have been found in so many remote areas, because they had these huge airships that were able to transport vast amounts, vast tonnage of various construction materials into quite remote areas where there wasn't, decent road networks or rail networks.
Now, just out of interest, I'm very interested in why you feel in World War II there were so many of these air balloons that were around. The US Navy created a load as well. What was the purpose in World War II of these huge airships? I mean, officially, obviously, you had them flying over London as well, and the photographs are absolutely incredible. You know, huge aerial photographs of these huge ships floating. What was going on there?
They were used for mainly surveillance purposes. So if it was the US Navy or perhaps the Royal Navy here in the United Kingdom of Great Britain, they weren't used for the original purposes that they were designed for. They were designed as literally aerial palaces or palaces of the skies, and were really seen as a form of class and grandeur. And it's interesting how they were again, here we have that word repurposing, and they were repurposed by the military industrial complex or the MIC, and eventually they were just phased out to becoming a sideline commercial interest. And I think when you look at what they were used for, which is in a wartime situation where with World War II, when it commenced on the 1st of September 1939 and ended with victory in Europe on the 8th of May 1945, it really kind of was a wrapping up process that really snubbed the entire beauty and elegance of the occult technology that had been derived from Great Tartaria and Northern Russia. And yet nobody credits the Nordic Tartarians or these Tartarian Aryans and the various outlying colonies they had, such as the Sami or the Laplanders living in northwestern Russia, and obviously the various Turkic tribes of Central Asia, for example, who were fully part of the civilization of Great Tartaria. And so none of these individual scientists and engineers or technologists from Great Tartaria were ever acknowledged. Everything was repurposed. The so-called discovery, the manufacturing, and the mass production of the airships was therefore credited to many other individuals. It was, and then the actual usage of them was repurposed from something that was rather peaceful to do with leisure time and holidays, a form of social tranquility, and a sort of a sky-based adventure for Nordic Tartarians. I mean, you just look at the contrast of what went on. So you take these beautiful airships, and we know that they had specific names for these. In Tartaria, for example, the actual airships were given different names, such as the Hawi Gamila, or airships, also known as the Asma Gamila, or Skyships. They were also known as the Havig Gamila, or again, airships, and also known as the Gok Gamila, or Skyships. And there was maybe 25, 30, maybe 35 or more different kind of aerodynamic designs for these beautiful airships that were on some of them were like moored almost permanently over the large towns and cities of Great Tartaria, with multicolored spotlights beaming up to them. They would be beautifully and ornately dressed with different multicolored lights that flashed in sequences as the boundless telluric electricity was drawn down on the antennae into the onboard internal capacitors of these huge airships, with people dining on wonderful food and relaxing together, harmonic music. You imagine the healing temples below in the various towns and cities, and the multicolored light, literally radiating outwardly, and the harmonic and beautiful sounds of all the choral singers, both children and adults.
Did you think the air balloons would have actually caught the telluric energy, like as they were up above the cities, and they'd actually draw it down into the cities? Because I've seen recently people actually putting drones up in the sky up to a certain height, and they're finding at certain heights they can actually pick up. There's an energy in the ether that they can actually pick up, and they can actually broadcast this energy down to some sort of energy capacitator, and they're actually running things from their drone that are up in the sky. And these are videos I've only seen recently. So this is things popping up. How real they are, I haven't tried it, but it's still very interesting that there seems to be an energy current at a certain height that we can actually pick up on. And that's what I'm really interested in. Maybe these airships, and they'd seem that they sometimes went for very long distances. So, these weren't powered by fuel, and obviously even hydrogen would be limited. So I wonder whether or not that energy was actually getting harvested or taken from the energy currents of the air. Have you heard of this?
I have heard of that, and what I've considered is, and again, this is sheer speculation, but it makes some logical sense that if the vast, shall we say, size of some of these airships over the luminescent cities of, for example, like Mulgum and Bayada and Kambulik and Bargu in northern Tartaria, for example, and additionally to that, across the extensive towns in the vast Piacida region and the Jakuti region of northern Tartaria, there were actual factories that manufactured these different airships, and many of them could have been literally aerial substations that were there to literally control and regulate the actual, shall we say, the concentration of telluric electricity and act as electrical distributors to specific points. They could have been tethered, for example, to specific areas for specific electrical transmission purposes. Again, that's this sheer speculation, but they were so heavily insulated with non-conductive metal sheeting as a coating, while they had highly conductive internal frameworks that were also heavily insulated. So there was no risk of electric fires or any damage that would put the airships at risk of crashing to the ground. So they could be literally moored up, literally levitating for weeks or months on end. There wasn't any kind of onboard generators that would then overheat because everything was carefully regulated. With heating and cooling systems, and it was a perpetual, therefore, and boundless electrical intake that was going on, and so there was so much of this telluric electricity available that could be drawn down above the towns and cities in Great Tartaria that it is definitely feasible to consider that many of these airships, and therefore the designs of those airships, as they were highly symmetrical and geometric in shape, served a specific purpose to channel in different ways and create specific frequencies and vibrations from drawing down that telluric electricity that could be used for whatever purpose: manufacturing, construction. It could be used for medicinal purposes. It could even possibly be used actually to create very beautiful types of artwork and sculptures where different types of hard stone, for example, could be carved with electricity. For example, we know if you look at geology in North America, that very powerful prehistoric electrical storms helped to actually carve out the Grand Canyon, which is obviously a pretty epic area, and also many other parts of the United States where you see these huge rock-like edifices, that have been almost carved out. And it's because electricity has largely done that in huge storms. So we know that that is definitely a possibility, that on a much smaller scale, an artificial scale that was obviously controlled by the Nordic Tartarians, that they could have used it for more creative purposes as well. So, as well as also carving much of the stonework, the actual ornamentation and the fenestration around the windows and doors of their incredibly beautiful palaces and stately homes in their towns and cities. So, from the vast Piacida region and Jakuti region of northern Tartaria, there was this, thousands of square kilometers where huge factories had been constructed to then manufacture different designed airships, and they would have served perhaps different purposes, some more for passenger usage, some for cargo, some specifically to absorb vast amounts of telluric electricity, acting as aerial based substations for the redistribution of smaller amounts of electricity to different regions. They could store that electricity and they could actually then transport it, and they could then actually transfer the electricity from their onboard capacitors to capacitors in extremely remote areas. If they were outside the main electrical networks in the towns and cities, because they hadn't, obviously been integrated with the occult technology to begin with. There's definitely that possibility as well. So
what do you think, just with Leonardo, people like Leonardo da Vinci, he invented what was called the aerial screw. All right. So this was, I don't think this was, this kind of floated down. This seemed to anyway. Obviously, there's no video footage of this. but all the drawings he did, he deciphered and worked out a whole kind of mechanism of even actually created wings, designed plans for wings so humans wore wings. Now, I don't know how successful these were, but this was back in the 15th century. Where did all this information go, Steve? So let's talk about the Vimanas in the sense with the Vimanas, because that gives us some evidence.
So let's just look at two aspects. If we look at the director of the International Academy of Sanskrit Research, Gomatham Ritapuran Ravikanta Joshia, also known as G.R. Joshia, and obviously he came from that facility in the city of Mysore or Mysuru in the Karnataka or the Karanadu region of southwestern India. Now, he obviously compiled together what became known as the Vamanika Sastra, or Traversa Subject Manual. And this had differently designed traverses, and these were, some of them absolutely vast in size. Many of them didn't actually look like what your standard commercial-looking airships that were really being produced during the Victorian age and the Edwardian period.
Yeah, pretty far out.
Yeah, and so when you look at what Gomatham Ritapuran Ravikanta Joshua was doing, he was compiling together information that he had received, and that information had come from Pandit Subbaraya Sastry, and he apparently had a psychic, shall we say, level of experiences over quite a long period from, I think it was the beginning of January 1918, right the way through to the end of December 1923. And he literally drawn out the schematics and of these various Vimana or traverses. And, he said that this was a major indication that what had gone on in Vedic India, literally going back 4,500 to 5,300 years ago, had been the mass production of these Vimanas. But then you take a look, for example, at the work of Leonardo da Vinci, and what you were discussing with the various drawings that he did. Where did that come from? I mean, he had a drawing of what appeared to be a helicopter and I think a submarine as well. So where did that?
That's right. Yeah, you did.
Yeah, where did that information come from? Well, you have to remember the Jesuit order of the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican City State in Italy was fully part, obviously, what went on in Central America and South America with the Spanish conquistadors, and the various European monarchs. And that was really about removing occult technology that had been commonplace amongst the Aztecs and the Inca and the Toltecs and the Mayans. And obviously what went on, in South America was very similar, especially in countries like Brazil and Argentina and Chile. So what we see is a suppression of occult technology and removing it. And again, I did mention this in a previous Sacred Wisdom podcast, and that is when we look at the Dark Ages are also known as the early medieval period. And this was a time after the collapse of the Roman Empire and the arising of the Holy Roman Empire that was neither Holy Roman or an empire. It was really the basis of the Roman Catholic Church, where the Catholic priesthood decided, they put themselves in a social position to decide what should be given to the masses, the populaces, and what should not be given to them, in terms of their education. So there was a huge deletion by removal of occult technology, of prehistoric artifacts, relics, and so forth. And there was a complete reworking and reformatting of, shall we say, spirituality for various, societies and communities just across, say, mainland Europe, and Britain, as it was known at the time, was actually called Albion, and ancient Ireland. So there was a lot of suppression, and it created a mass level of educational ignorance. Hence, it became known as the Dark Ages. It was a darkness based on, shall we say, an ignorance of knowledge and scientific understanding. So when we then look across, going eastward into northwestern Russia, north central Russia, northeastern Russia, you're looking at perhaps such a vast amount of occult technology that had been passed down from the actual civilization of the Nordic Hyperboreans, from the Kola Peninsula and the Mangsta Blast, as it's known today, of northwestern Russia, across the Yamal and Nenets autonomous Okrug of north central Russia and the polar Urals and the northern Urals that are such extremely remote areas, and there's such vast amounts of hidden occult technology and artifacts and relics there that have never been examined by Russian archaeologists, all the way across to the Kamchatka Peninsula in northeastern Russia, and across and even further, going up into the actual Arctic Ocean and the Arctic North Polar region, where there were various towns and cities that were part of the civilization of Hyperborea, and then obviously the emergence of the civilization of the Scythians and the on the Pontic Caspian steppes of southern Russia, on the fringes, I suppose, also Western Russia and into northern Ukraine and across into other parts of Eastern Europe. We see that there was a lot of occult technology that is not being acknowledged by historians, that wasn't actually suppressible. It wasn't able to be removed from the narrative that was being weaved, and then was going to be presented as the official version of history for the masses to accept.
It's very sad how someone's gone to this immense effort to suppress something that could be of great benefit to the world, and actually would actually be benefit them if they bothered to actually stop getting on their ego power trip that these elitists seem to be on. And it's very interesting. I think we have to be very well prepared for what's ahead of us, in the sense of when this technology is released back to us, because there will be a point where it'll come back, and I think a lot of people will be absolutely mind blown. But we are given all the breadcrumbs, and this is what people don't realize. They only have to look at a part of history, and the Vimanas directly prove that there has been a very highly advanced technology in the past. Now, we can only directly speculate to directly what that is, but there is definitely free energy systems that existed.
That's right.
And they would no doubt still exist today. Information doesn't disappear, it gets hidden and suppressed. So, but Steve, bringing it on, so where we are now in the sense of airships, we do still have airships now, and they do flights. Lockheed have made quite a few different types of airships. There's actually tours around the world you can do as well in these airships, North Polar regions, Antarctica regions, all this.
Yeah.
Are these using this occult technology, or are they still using the primitive technology of what we have today?
Yeah, because that's the kind of level one version of the 3D holographic reality that we define as the material dimension, that the elites and the secret societies want Joe Public, the Homo sapiens or human beings of planet Earth to accept as the only version of this 3D holographic reality, because they're not going to have electrically powered versions of the airships like the Tartarians had. They're certainly not going to have quicksilver or mercury, engines that can actually create anti-gravity, such as with the Vimanas or Traversers. And so when you look at what the incredible individual known as Gomatham Ritapuran Ravikanta Josha, what he compiled in the Vimanika Sastra, or the Traverser Subject Manual, towards the end of August 1952, it was a reminder of what the past had been, how wonderful and how incredible it had been, how liberated human beings had been across, especially the Asian continent, across India, across Cathay, which then became known as Oriental Tartaria or Western China, and obviously Great Tartaria, Northern Russia. So we know that, yes, they're certainly not going to commercially make available that kind of technology. You imagine that was available, then the first question most people are going to start asking is, well, can we actually manufacture ourselves using basic materials, electrically powered, levitating and, propulsion-based airships?
I'm just going to have a counter argument to that. Let's just say, was there a reason why it hasn't been developed? Let's just put it not in a malicious way that it's been taken away from us. Just look at it like, well, was it a reason that for our development that we couldn't use this technology? I'm looking at other angles as well. I think it's always good to look at it in other perspectives. So what do you think on that?
I think, we have to remember that that's possibility, but we have to remember that history is written by the victors.
Yeah.
So it's a very almost prehistoric aphorism, really. But
It's in the, there's the truth,
it's never
guys.
been fully
You've got all
attributed to
the
any one
answers in that
individual.
one statement.
Yeah.
The victors, the very people in power are writing the history. So there you go.
So if we just remember that, we had the first mud flood, the second mud flood, and the third mud flood. To simplify it right down, these were huge cataclysmic events that were worldwide. They weren't in one sort of small area, such as, a city in Central Europe or something. These were events that affected the lives of millions of people over thousands of square kilometers, destroyed vast amounts of farming and agricultural based land masses. And at the same time as all of that, a lot of that occult technology was destroyed, and even the schematics or the blueprints, the actual intricate diagrams of many of the components, a lot of that was lost because, these events suddenly happened so quickly.
There was no. Do you think that they wouldn't have this catastrophe or whatever happened exactly? Do you think they would have known or been warned about it, or do you think?
I think some people were, and I think it's the same. I think you look at, for example, the Atlantean continent and the various Atlantean islands. We know that from past life regression done by clinical hypnotherapists that the trauma that event caused sometime around 10754 BC to 10753 BC with the actual remaining Atlantean islands, let alone the actual Atlantean continent that was destroyed at a much earlier stage, many thousands of years earlier. What we know is that many people did escape, but many in the outer-lying geographic locations were not aware. There wasn't time to warn them. It happened so quickly. So some survived, some didn't. Same happened with Great Tartaria in northern Russia. There was intentions, to just sort of bring it back round to summarize my answer to your question. Yes, I'd say that for humanity's spiritual learning over generations, sometimes a world reset of some nature or another has to take place.
Yeah.
And you can postulate or speculate that outside linear space-time, say in the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane, are there some type of ethereal manipulators or ethereal controllers that on some higher vibrational level are actually part of the divine creation and actually serve that purpose, as we touched on before, the Golden Mantis, connected to many of the alien abduction experiences.
And for anybody who's just stepped into that look into that before you start making a choice on that and what you believe on that, because the Mantis, there seems to be an existence of this race, so you need to understand how this is existing. Please see the previous videos about all that, please.
So everything really, you take a look at it, a more holistic approach. It's not just about the airships of Tartaria or the way that the elites and the secret societies would then say, take that occult technology and say, right, okay, so how do we actually create a regression here to make it appear slightly more primitive? It's based on the more system we've got, the petrochemical industry and the various chemicals that we produce as commercial products and so forth to give to Joe Public. So let's fill those airships with hydrogen, and that's too flammable, it's too risky, so let's try helium, which is non-flammable. But they're not going to say, well, I know, we'll just look at the actual schematics and just create a airship as it would have been designed and manufactured in Great Tartaria, northern Russia, with an antennae, with an onboard electrical capacitor, because then suddenly people start getting the idea of boundless electrical energy, boundless electricity being drawn down from the atmosphere. Why are we all paying for it?
And it was like an accident waiting to happen as well. It's like, you design a gas ball that's explosive in the air. It's ridiculous. Like, you wouldn't design a whole airship to then put a flammable gas inside it to then raise it above a town or city. It wouldn't make any logical sense. You wouldn't actually, design it in the first place like that because of the dangers behind it. So the fact that there must have been at some point either some sort of energy inside that balloon or something naturally powering that balloon to keep it up in the air. There are obviously heat. Any heat within a balloon will make something lift. So what was happening in Russia? Because it was happening all over the world. These airships were everywhere.
Okay. So if we look back to the time of the most devastating period of the third mud flood, which occurred around the 7th of June, 1892, it wasn't long after that. We have to remember that the Russian Empire really wanted to develop its own aerial-based martial protection units. And this actually materialized in the form of the Imperial Russian Air Service that was also known as the Emperor's Military Air Fleet. Now, these two bodies were one actual basic unit, and they were created out of the engineers corps of the Imperial Russian Army. And this was actually facilitated and brought into existence on the 30th of July, 1912, by the Russian Emperor, Nikolai Alexandrovich Romanov, who most people know as Nicholas II. And the Imperial Russian Air Service was then used, and it's only operated for 5 years during World War One. It was actually used basically for aerial maneuvers and aerial protective routines during World War II from the 28th of July 1914 to the 11th of November 1918. Russia was just simply brought in by the European aristocracy. It was part of a plan, all human beings seen as pawns, whether it was in France or Belgium, Germany, whether it was in Russia. And it was all about really a consolidation process and geopolitically preparing for the next stage that the elites and the secret societies wanted to develop after the collapse of Great Tartaria in northern Russia and the eventual collapse of the Russian Empire. So what we have to remember is, with the third mud flood, reaching its completion, it's settling down, the Imperial Russian Army of the Russian Emperor, Nikolai Alexandrovich Romanov, who most know as Nicholas II, would regularly then start to travel into northern Russia to effectively retrieve large remnants of the airships and other forms of occult technology which had been manufactured by the Nordic Tartarians. There was a lot of excavation that was going on at that time, in many remote areas across northwestern Russia, north central Russia, and northeastern Russia. And this information then was all retrieved, all these artifacts were retrieved, but none of that information and artifacts, those schematics, was then used for the benefit of the Russian people to rebuild the Russian economy, the Russian nation, to perpetuate the longevity of the Russian Empire. So what we can see was, again, it was a way of removing information, knowledge, and awareness, really, that was there to liberate human beings that could then actually rebirth, if you like, a newer kind of Great Tartaria. The elites and the secret societies, the European aristocrats and the European bankers in places like Switzerland did not want that to take place. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that. So this is the situation that occurred. So we have to remember that once the Second French Empire of the French president, Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, also known as Napoleon III, began on the 14th of January, 1852. It was used by the European bankers in Switzerland until its end on the 27th of October, 1870, to ensure the aerial-based occult technology from Great Tartaria could be ascribed to inventors in mainland Europe.
Is that historically recorded?
It's not. What it is that suddenly, out of nowhere, all the actual inventions in terms of aerial technologies all came from Europe and then also from North America.
Yeah,
but we know from all the actual medieval woodcuts, all the actual beautiful paintings that have come from Great Tartaria, and all the actual accounts and many actual Russian blogs, Russian forums, where they talk about, subjects such as Russian Hyperboreanism and Great Tartaria. We know there's a lot of documentation that is actually held by the Russian Federation, and it's likely that the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, is very aware of this, as many of his colleagues, of the actual the true history of Great Tartaria, how these airships were an essential part of the occult technology, especially in terms of transportation and for construction purposes. And suddenly we see that Great Tartaria had to be destroyed at all costs, so that the actual scientific achievements of Great Tartaria could then be attributed to various scientists and engineers and technologists across mainland Europe. And this was very pleasing, of course, to the European aristocrats and the European bankers in Switzerland, because this was their financial system or banking system that everything was going to be based on, which was third-party debt usury, which was with planned obsolescence to do with the actual life of any product, so that it would obviously wear out. So you had to go and buy another product or products, and they obviously owned all the factories and produced all the products, so it increased their profits. Much of this didn't really exist in Great Tartaria. It was a civilization of really quite profound spiritual psychology, and was very, very different in terms of the collective mindset to that of European Christians or American Christians and so forth. And so we really must understand and appreciate all these differences that were going on at the time.
It's a kind of mockery. I mean, like the official history there, it's 1796 that the first ever, well, where there's a balloon and a basket. It was a balloon and a basket created. And it's a kind of complete mockery of all this information. To look 300 years previous to that, you only have to look at Leonardo da Vinci's pictures and realize how advanced they were. And actually, it's
doesn't make any sense, especially when you take a look, at many of the medieval woodcuts and medieval paintings where people couldn't draw, anything to proportion. So various types of birds and mammals and human beings look very odd. And trees and plants look very odd. And suddenly you have Leonardo da Vinci's bringing out these very intricate diagrams of occult technology. We've got to remember that the French president, Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, also known as Napoleon III, was a very good friend of a very interesting inventor known as Baptiste Jules Henri Jacques Giffard. And he was given schematics. And it's very interesting to note that these schematics he were given were actually for a standardized looking airship that had been quite commonplace in Great Tartaria and had been actually manufactured in Great Tartaria for many generations and across obviously parts of Northern Europe. So again, we have an individual is being attributed with inventing the first airship, but in fact he'd invented the first reformatted airship, which then was actually presented to the French people on the 24th of September 1852.
Of course, so, 1852. Well, that date again, everything happened. That 20-year period, everything came alive. Nothing existed before that time.
That's right. And of course, that period on the 24th of September 1852, you're looking back only a few years to the second mud flood, and then you're looking forward to really the deliberately, in my opinion, augmented. It was always going to happen, the third mud flood, but there were various factors in place that seemed to want to ensure it had a maximum destructive impact on Great Tartaria and Northern Russia to ensure that civilization could never recover. So it's very interesting, these dates, they keep coming up over and over again.
But well, it seems that it's the 200-year cycle of the reset, and
that's right.
As it goes around, it hits this point. It's like some things might not be possible to get rid of like that. So, like Tartaria, you can't erase a whole landmass.
We've also got to remember there was a lot of suppression that also occurred regarding the occult technology of Great Tartaria and Northern Russia. During the Russian Revolution, which occurred from the 8th of March 1917 through to the 16th of June 1923. And with the creation of what became known as the Russian Provisional Government after the collapse of the House of Romanov and their removal from power over the Russian people on the 1st of September 1917, again, we're looking at these dates. These are all within only a few generations, everything was really starting to rapidly change. There was a lot of changes going on. The European aristocrats, the European bankers in Switzerland wanted permanent changes to take place to really just try and create a deletion of Great Tartaria and Northern Russia And then, of course, the Russian Empire itself collapsed. So it was a collapse and there was another collapse. And this was all part of the world reset, trying to make people forget about the past, forget about what has occurred before, what has been repeated over and over again.
Just a question slightly out of it. Do you think the internet's been created before?
Yeah, there was a type of internet apparently that did exist using various types of crystallic-based occult technology in Atlantis, but it wasn't exactly the same. It was similar to what we know as wireless application protocol. It was using a system that was based off what was known as the Great Firestone, which was a vast, as you know, huge red quartz or ruby crystal on one of the main islands of Atlantis that powered much of the actual electrical systems, obviously. And again, that huge Great Firestone, as it's called in the English language, was drawing down telluric electricity from the atmosphere directly above the Atlantean continent. So,
which to most nowadays that would seem like a complete fantasy and something from a Legend of Zelda computer game.
Yeah. And then we can see that Earth lights, that have been known even back to the Paleolithic age and then the Mesolithic age, right through to the Neolithic period. And you take a look at the emergence of the Irish Druids and the British Druids, and you can see the use of furrowing out lines in the ground to channel the earth lights. So you see it at Silbury Hill, you see the same kind of pattern emerging around Stonehenge. You see the same thing occurring across many different locations, such as the Rollright stones up in Oxfordshire. So this has been known, this kind of occult technology, in other words, how to create various devices or apparatus to draw down telluric electricity for boundless-free lighting and heating, to be used for medicinal purposes and so forth. It's been known about for thousands and thousands of years. And here we are in the 21st century, and we have, again, I've mentioned it many times, this whole bogusly created cost of living crisis, and people are paying for electricity when actually there is this vast, endless amounts of atmospheric based electricity all around us, just waiting to be tapped into and used as power sources in both residential settings and on a commercial basis and in industrial processes, and it's not being used. So everything's like there's a cost involved existing here on planet Earth as human beings or Homo sapiens, and there shouldn't be anything at all. One of the things the elites and the secret societies knew they had to do was to progressively discredit the actual usage of airships on a wide commercial scale. So there was a number of, I believe, deliberately engineered disasters that we used that were given huge amounts of news media coverage. And I can give examples of those. So if we look back, for example, to the R101 airship that was actually part of the Imperial airship scheme in the United Kingdom of Great Britain, and that was destroyed on the 4th of October 1930, basically because of a massive storm that was taking place. And this occurred as the R101 airship had crossed the English Channel, and it was destroyed over the Alone commune of the OC department in northern France. We then go on to other storm-related crashes of US Navy helium-based or helium-filled airships called the USS Akron ZRS-4 on the 4th of April 1933, and the crash of the USS Macon or the ZRS-5, and that occurred on the 12th of February 1935. And the final airship that really was used to completely discredit the beneficial use, yes, and it was the largest airship that was ever constructed on planet Earth, was the LZ-129 Hindenburg, also known as the DLZ-129, and that was destroyed on the 6th of May 1937 in the Manchester township of New Jersey in the northeastern United States. And then we look at their usage in World War II from the 1st of September 1939 to victory in Europe on the 8th of May 1945 for mainly surveillance purposes and to be used as an aerial distraction against the Luftwaffe and so forth.
They're also used as ways of. I've looked at pictures of them. They're used for like Google Maps. They actually use them to map out towns and work out where to place.
That's the surveillance aspect. Yeah, they were mapping out. So there was an
area in 1900s. That was in like over 100 years ago. So people will say, "Oh, we're worried about being tracked now." It was happening back then. It's been happening for years.
That tracking process has been going on a lot longer than many individuals actually realise. Absolutely.
Yeah, I know. And we'll maybe do something on that actually. But Steve, is there anything else you'd like to bring in about it? It's fascinating. The more I've looked at the images and looked into the airships, it's just absolutely fascinating, mind-blowing stuff. Like, can you imagine being on one of these ships? Like, it wouldn't probably make any noise either. And it'll be really quiet, and you just hear the wind up high. And there's something so beautiful about airships. And that's what I'm so fascinated by.
Yeah, it's a shame because the way all that, came to a shuddering end, really, with the epic nature and how eloquent and amazing airships are, is very sad when you consider that, for example, at the various world fairs, how incredible it was to see so many of these airships being actual displayed to the public.
Yeah, there was a lot selling there. I didn't really ever looked into the airships at the world fairs, but there were a lot of balloon type crafts that were sold there, right? Would they have been the kind of old world type craft of, would that have been?
They had various designs. A lot of them were actually oblong design, like giant rectangular shaped airships, while others were much more, shall we say, ovaloid in their shapes. And you had, for example, the unusual dirigible known as the Máquina Voladora, from the Spanish language, meaning flying machine, and the California Arrow airship, which the aeronautical engineer known as Augustus Royston Knabenschue had constructed. You had the Francois airship and the airship called the Montana Meteor, which the professional aeronaut known as Thomas Chalkley Bembo actually piloted, was on board and proudly displayed at the Louisiana Purchase Exposition. And that public gathering has actually become known as the St. Louis World's Fair to many people. And it was obviously held in the city of St. Louis of Missouri in the American Midwest.
Yeah.
It was facilitated from the 30th of April 1904 to the 1st of December 1904.
Oh, hang on. Is that 6 months again? And what happened to it afterwards? Did it disappear all of a sudden?
All of them. Yeah. There wasn't a huge number of
I'm just
world
saying,
fairs.
I'm not saying that hasn't happened before.
Yeah. Layers of world resetting going on, and there were other airships that were displayed, for example, at the aeronautics division of the Jamestown Exposition, that was also known as the Jamestown Tercentennial Exposition.
Wow.
And that public gathering was at Sewell's Point on Hampton Roads in the city of Norfolk, in Virginia, southeastern United States, and that was facilitated from the 26th of April 1907 to the 1st of December 1907. And but there wasn't, apart from those two world fairs, there wasn't many others that airships were displayed at. And then, as you just said, like all these world fairs, there would have been a mixture of old world empire Tartarian architecture in many of the palaces and stately homes, and many of the other buildings then were just constructed around them. And once these world fairs all came to an end, they were all demolished, and many of the airships were either repurposed or they were basically destroyed. So again, it's almost like showing the American people, as with many of the European people, this is here's a glimpse of the past. Here's a glimpse of what we may consider doing on a commercial level. And obviously they went from hydrogen, which is flammable, to helium, which is non-flammable, to actually create levitation within these airships they had designed. But there's no way they were going to have the antennae, the onboard electrical capacitors, the non-conductive metal sheeting as the actual coating, which define the outside and the bodywork of these airships, and obviously the heavily insulated and conductive metal frameworks inside that would have allowed for, boundless free electrical energy on board for levitation and propulsion purposes. And it just wasn't going to happen, because it would have instilled in the minds of the American people, in the minds of Europeans and human beings all over planet Earth, how incredible this free and boundless occult technology was and still is.
Mm.
And it would have created probably quite a lot of political uprising in many countries, because it would be so there was time limits to how much could be publicly displayed, and in terms of rollout and research and development and so forth. And then obviously after World War II ended, that was it. It became a sideline commercial enterprise for small companies, basically, and that's all airships are today. It was not a mainstream commercial usage as it was in Great Tartaria, northern Russia. So there you go.
Well, Stephen, amazing, my brother. Thank you again. Absolutely incredible information as always, and your research is just opens my mind more and more to new ideas. So thank you for that. And if anybody would like to purchase our book that we've both written, it's called Mysterious Realities. The links are in the description. You can buy it on paperback on Amazon or ebook, or you can buy directly from my website as well, and I'll send that off to you. And thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much. Been wonderful. And for now, it's a bye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.